I'm Rabbi Sarah Berman. I'm our Director of Jewish Culture and Programming, and it is truly a pleasure to see you all here tonight. Central is your home for critical conversations about the world today, about our lives, and about finding meaning in this time and this place. We are delighted to be here together as a community this evening as we welcome for tonight's critical conversation, Rabbi Angela Buchdahl in conversation with Dr. Jonathan Haidt. Please welcome them.
Hello, everyone. So happy to be here. We got a very nice warm day today, and we have not been able to switch over the whole system to air conditioning. So I just want to say to you, and also to you, Jonathan, you can take your jackets off, make yourself comfortable. We did open the windows. We'll open the door in a moment, but just to get yourself comfortable. This will be a heated conversation anyway, but we can at least start from a lower base point. Jonathan, thank you so much for being here in your home. We met many years ago through the Sussmans for dinner, and then you joined Central Synagogue, and you have actually been a sounding board for me for many high holiday sermons on, you could probably guess which topics, including dissent and debate and all of those kinds of questions. But anyway, I feel incredibly proud and grateful that you are a part of our Central Synagogue family and membership. Your work has helped so many people name and understand something that we are really feeling every day, that we are living in a time of extraordinary division, distrust, anxiety, and disorientation. And in your writing, whether it's on moral psychology, on the reshaping of childhood, or on the effects of social media on democracy itself, you keep returning to a central question, which is, how do human beings flourish together? And what happens when the moral, social, and technological conditions that make that flourishing possible begin to erode? So to start, since you are a social scientist and you understand the very big trends that have been part of this, can you help set the stage and tell us, how did we get here?
Sure. So first, I really want to thank you. When my wife and I moved to New York from Charlottesville in 2011, we didn't join a synagogue at first, and then as our son Max got about 8 years old, I realized, it's now or never. And my wife is Korean American, and she was extremely supportive, and we looked at a couple synagogues, and we just felt so at home here. And then, of course, on top of that, you give these amazing, deep, intellectual and emotional sermons. And so my family, we're just very grateful to you for that. As to your question, yeah, my research was always on morality, moral development. Then I moved over to political psychology. But ever since 2014, all of my work has been trying to unravel a mystery. And the mystery is, what the hell is happening to us? Because it started, 2014, 2015, weird stuff emerged on college campuses. I wrote an article called The Coddling the American Mind. What's going on with kids in college campuses? But then it spread to, media and the arts and government, and, the left changed radically, the right changed radically. And so it seems like what some people call a polycrisis, like an all-encompassing, everything is going wrong at the same time, or all systems are malfunctioning at the same time. That's what I've been trying to figure out. And the key to it, I believe, is to keep your eye on technology. That is, I have become something, sort of a techno-determinist. That means I'm because there still is human agency. It's not that technology determines everything. But if you're trying to understand complex social trends, you gotta start with the changes in technology, because they change everything downstream, often decades after the technology is introduced. And so the most enlightening idea that really kind of puts it all in a single analytic framework is this interesting idea called the Gutenberg parenthesis, which was an idea developed by some Danish media theorists around 2010. And it goes like this. Human societies were always oral. People would make things up, they would say things, there wasn't really authorship or copyright, but communication flowed all over the place, and there wasn't like a central authority on what's true. There were books for religious purposes, but people didn't read, and they didn't read books. And then Gutenberg comes along, and everything changes. Now, it takes a while. Gutenberg is the 1440s, 1450s. Really, the 1500s books start to become important. By the 1600s, you're now getting the Enlightenment and coffee shops where the scientific revolution takes place. And it's changing the way people think. Literacy changes cognition in a very, very deep way. It allows for the formulation of arguments over time, extended arguments over time, in conversation with people from hundreds of years ago. And so all of society is doing this. Now, of course, Jews had been doing this for 1,000 years by then.
But only elite rabbis.
That's right, okay. But Jews were really pre-adapted. Jewish practices and skills and education made Jews pre-adapted for modernity. And once Jews were let out of the ghettos, they were just like, we're 1,000 years ahead. Like, we've been doing this, so in the Enlightenment era, Jews came to dominate in anything about words, arguments. Law professors are 30 or 40% Jewish in this country that lead law schools. But to bring this back to answer your question, so we have this Gutenberg era. There's 100 years of wars of religion. It doesn't start nicely, but my God, by the time you get to the 19th and 20th centuries, we get the best human societies that have ever been in terms of just progress on everybody's rights, flourishing, health, safety, everything. And by the late 20th century, we're even thinking like, hey, we did it. The Soviet Union falls, Berlin Wall falls. Hey, it's liberal democracy from here on in. There is no alternative. So that's the way, those of us who remember the 90s, which is most people in this room, it was like we made it. Humanity, like we did it. And this was, again, a world in which Jews really flourished. And there was that article many of us read a couple years ago in The Atlantic, The End of the Jewish Century. So it doesn't feel like that now. Things are really changing. And so just to finish the argument about the parenthesis, the people who formulated the hypothesis, their idea was things are going to go, that was a temporary period, 1500 to 2000, temporary. Now we're back to a world in which anyone can make things up and send it around, and there's no central authority. And the people who made this hypothesis, they're like even optimistic about this. They're like, and there's some good things, there won't be centralized authority. But the internet, as it looked in 2010, was really optimistic. We all loved it. And now it's a hellhole that seems to be bringing down reality and sanity and everything else. So the world we're going into is the AI era. And so the key thing I'll say is the Gutenberg era and the Enlightenment gave us a set of intellectual, social, and moral foundations that were very, very sturdy for the world that we built, the world in which Jews thrived in, and the world in which Reform Judaism separated off from more traditional, more Orthodox Judaism. Reform Judaism flourished. This was like the best possible environment for Reform Jews. And now that it's ending and we're moving into what we now see is going to be known as the AI era. In 20 years, it will be called, there was Gutenberg and then there was AI, the AI era. It's as though we built a whole civilization on bedrock, and now the bedrock is turning to sand. You can build on sand. I mean, look at Saudi Arabia and look at Dubai. I mean, you can, I don't know, maybe they have bedrock, I don't know, but you can build on sand. It's just you need really different building strategies, and we don't know what those are yet, and we haven't found them. And I think a lot of things are going to break in the coming years, and the challenge will be how do we rebuild it? So that's the big picture of why everything is malfunctioning at the same time.
Wow. So much to process there. I'm first beginning with just thinking about books as a technology, which we have to remind ourselves that it was a radical technology when the printing press really made it ubiquitous, and also imagining that it wasn't just that it changed what people could know, but actually rewired their brains in some way from a more oral tradition in which they had to memorize things to kind of just feeling like they could access. And you're right, I think we all feel like we're on the cusp of this, and it feels incredibly frightening and destabilizing to imagine it. So what do you imagine might be the way, or maybe you're already seeing it, that this technology is already rewiring our brains and the way we think and the way we process?
Yeah. Okay, so, right. I'm looking at the way technology is affecting two things primarily. One is children's development, brain development, focusing on puberty as a period of very, very rapid brain change. So that's what the book, The Anxious Generation, was about. And then the other focus is on what it's doing to liberal democracy and how democracies will adapt. As Tristan Harris says, the technology is making authoritarians better authoritarians. Mao would have loved to have the technology that Xi Jinping has. But it's making democracies worse democracies. So that's another set. So we're going to, first let's talk about the kids.
Let's talk about the kids.
And then we'll talk about democracy. So here's what we already know. We know that childhood changed radically between 2010 and 2015. In 2010, teens had flip phones, and they used them to call each other and to text each other. And to play Snake. If you're millennials in here, you probably remember Snake. Okay. But that was it. And then by 2015, everyone has a smartphone with a front-facing camera and an Instagram account. And instantly, the girls become anxious and depressed. Rates of emergency room visits for intentional self-harm quadruple for 10 to 14-year-old girls. They're the ones who get hit hardest. So mental health collapses, a sense of meaningfulness collapses. The saddest graph in the whole book is one, there's a question, my life often feels meaningless. And it was about 18% said yes to that in the 90s. It drops down to around 15% by 2010, which is when millennials are in high school. This is for kids. And then bingo, at 2012, 2013, it just shoots upward. It doubles over the next 10 or so years. So it's as though all of the foundations for children just dropped out and they were sort of lost and falling. We know that levels of anxiety, depression, self-harm, suicide are way up. We know that the ability to read books is way down. We know that the interest in reading books is way down. We know that the ability to pay attention for long enough to develop ideas is way down. Recently, I'm hearing increasing talk about how young people are not able to watch a movie. How could you be away from your phone for 90 minutes? You have to multitask. You have to have multiple screens. And this is a disaster for the ability to pay attention. The big mistake, not a mistake, the thing I learned since publishing The Anxious Generation is that the mental health collapse is not the biggest damage. That is devastating to the 20 or 30% of extra who are more depressed and anxious than they would have been. That's a huge toll. But the biggest damage, I believe, is the destruction of the human ability to pay attention, which is affecting most humans born after 1995, certainly in the developed world. And in the last year or two, it's now increasingly clear it's affecting all of us, even if you went through puberty in the old world. We're all feeling overwhelmed. We're all finding it harder to read books or watch movies or have long conversations. So that's what we're finding is a pervasive change in how we think, how we behave, our social lives, our sense of meaning. So it's an incredibly radical transformation. I don't know that humanity's ever gone through. We have never gone through a transformation this big in less than a few centuries. The arrival of agriculture, fire, agriculture, and the Industrial, those were big, but, we had a couple of centuries or millennia to incorporate. This one just hit us all of a sudden.
My daughter is tutoring for a Hebrew school for bar and bat mitzvah. So she has 30-minute Zoom classes with the students, and they cannot even focus for that 30 minutes. So she's using a strategy that she found on TikTok that you actually have to have a split screen with something else that's basically keeping their attention while you're teaching them. And I was like, oh my God, what is happening? And she said, well, at least then I can get them to not be on their phone. They're looking at this other thing that's basically their visual fidget. And I mean, just for a half an hour session. And so it's frightening. I could go into, but I don't need to because you should all have the book. I think most people have read The Anxious Generation, which is just an unbelievable book and a mega hit, in which you go through much of the actual studies that prove the causality here, and it's not. So we will take you on your word for this, and you can also read about it in his book. But you have been maybe the single most important champion of reforming this. And I just want to thank you because we knew something was wrong. We all wanted to put a name to it, but you gave us the data and the backing and in some ways the kind of the push to make this a social movement. And all around the world, we are seeing bans in schools for phones, and we're seeing this incredible trial in California right now. It's closely watched, testing whether major social media companies can be held accountable for designing platforms that allegedly addict children and worsen mental health outcomes. And you've argued that so many of these products are not neutral tools, but behavior shaping systems optimized for engagement, in which you knew that the companies knew that this is what they were doing, and they did it anyway. So is this a big tobacco moment for social media, and what would real accountability look like if we took the harm from these platforms seriously? What are you hoping for?
Yeah. Well, so this is absolutely a big tobacco moment. The parallels are extraordinary. You have a group of men who created companies whose business model requires or is dependent on addiction. Every industry of addiction depends primarily on the heavy users, alcohol, gambling, all of them. Every addictive industry relies on giving quick dopamine. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter of not just of pleasure, it's really more about motivation. You become very motivated to do the thing that got you dopamine previously. Every one of them knew that their product was addictive. They have research showing it. They hid that research. They don't let their kids use it, but they want our kids to use it. So the parallels are extraordinary. The difference in my mind is that the tobacco executives never had to see children suffer, whereas the social media executives, they're faced with all these stories. Thousands of parents are suing them because their kids are dead. And they know, we know from their internal research, they know that their product is causing depression, anxiety, self-harm, cyberbullying, huge numbers of deaths from fentanyl overdose because, as one girl said to me recently, I mean, everyone buys drugs on Snapchat. So when you make vice available to every child, frictionless and free, round the clock, you get not just a lot of direct physical harm and death, you get a kind of a degradation, a spiritual deprivation that is pervasive. So as far as I'm concerned, the social media guys are much worse than the tobacco executives. They're much crueler. They're causing damage at a much larger scale. Only 30% of American high school teens smoked cigarettes in the 90s, which was the peak period. But 95% of our kids are on social media. Most are being diminished. The majority of humans are being diminished by their industry. So I think social media is bigger than all industrial accidents in all of history combined. And we're living through it right now.
Wow. It's a strong statement, and I think that we are seeing the impacts, though, for sure. If you were to imagine that your work focuses on children, but staying on technology, again, like adults also feel fragmented and distracted and lonely and spiritually depleted. Your earlier work, the happiness hypothesis, is really interested in flourishing and in transcendence and what makes life worthwhile. So what do you think the digital culture is doing to all of our souls, not only our minds, but our capacity for reverence, for presence, for moral attention of some kind? I mean, like, what is it, how is that rewiring us? And not just kids.
So in my first book, The Happiness Hypothesis, was an exploration of ancient wisdom. I read all the wisdom literatures and took out all the psychological claims. And I thought it was going to be 12 separate chapters, 10 separate chapters. But it turns out there is a thread, and by the end of the book, I was actually able to offer what I think is a sort of like the meaning of life, or at least a life that feels meaningful, a life that is flourishing. And it's that this life, or this kind of happiness, it doesn't come from getting what you want. It doesn't come from within primarily. It comes from between. It comes from getting the right kind of embeddedness in three ways: between yourself and others, which is love and friendship, community; between yourself and your work. Humans need to feel productive, even if it's not paid employment. Just we need to feel that what we do matters to other people. And between yourself and something larger than yourself. We evolved to be kind of hive creatures, like bees, actually. I have a long section on that in The Righteous Mind. So we mostly flourish when we have a sense that we're part of something larger than ourselves. And secular life since the Industrial Revolution has been a threat to relationships and to a sense of purpose and meaningfulness. And religious communities have always been a haven. There are two big effects in the happiness literature. The happiest people are those who are religious, which means not belief, it's participating every week, participating regularly in a community. And marriage. It's about relationships and a sense of meaning. So those are the conditions of human flourishing. And what the technology has done to us, we were told it's going to help us connect. But when you connect to thousands of people a day, you don't have time for your friends or family. We have an article that just by Substack, afterbabel.com, we have an article just come out today by a couples therapist. You can imagine what's happened to the sex life of married people in this country. When you get into bed, you're tired, you got the kids to bed, and then one partner pulls out their phone. That's kind of it for the night. So, our technology is not really helping us connect. It's actually destroying the most important connections. It is helping us be more productive. We're more efficient in many ways, but we feel fragmented. We are not able to pay attention, so a lot of the quality of our work declines. A lot of what we're going through as adults isn't dopamine addiction, it's work addiction. We can work all the time. And my students at NYU, it's so sad, some of them are in industries where they say, well, we're required to return texts and emails within 15 minutes. We can never disconnect. We must always be on call. So there's a savagery, there's an inhumanity to what these things have. They were supposed to make us more connected and more productive, but we're feeling lonely and overwhelmed. So we're going to have to find ways to push back. And then back to the trials, there are three big levers we have. One, the most direct, would be legislation, but our Congress has never done a single thing ever to protect us or kids from this technology. But that might change. The other is the lawsuits, and none of these companies have ever faced a jury. No parents have ever been able to get a case in until now. This is the first, so it's completely historic. And I'm told by one of the lawyers, closing arguments were today or yesterday or tomorrow, and so the jury could return with a verdict as early as Friday or next week. So we might, and this is just one case out of thousands, but it's a bellwether case. It's the first one ever. So those are the second lever. So I'm optimistic, very optimistic about that. And then the third lever is collective action, and we're seeing that happening. It wasn't really happening 2 years ago. We were all confused. But we are seeing, driven by mothers, the mothers of the world first stood up and took action, and now we're beginning to see a lot of members of Gen Z. Young people are now standing up, forming groups, taking action. So I actually, of course this talk sounds, catastrophizing and pessimistic and doom, but this is why I'm not a techno-determinist, is because we've actually seen, in just the last 2 years, there actually is human agency. We actually can change things.
That is a hopeful note, and I am seeing a backlash / a fight back for our souls, and I see it here. The isolation and sort of lack of meaning, I think, is probably directly connected to sort of some of the deterioration we're seeing of both sort of civic engagement and civil discourse, and of course that is connected to some of the degradation of our liberal democracy. And I think that's the second topic that you talk a lot about. So if you could tell us, what does this kind of end of the Gutenberg era mean for liberal democracy?
Yeah. Okay, so let me do that. And so far this conversation is mostly like me spouting, my ideas in this big picture, which I hope is sort of going to set the context. But then this will allow us to then get into more of a conversation about how Jewish communities are adapting or could adapt or need to adapt. So the picture I painted of human development needs to proceed a certain way, and it no longer can proceed that way. One of the biggest things we've lost is unsupervised play. My partner in all of this, Lenore Skenazy, is sitting over there. She wrote the book Free Range Kids. She helped me to write the last parts of The Anxious Generation. So we've disrupted human development, and we've also disrupted the conditions of liberal democracy. So when Ben Franklin was asked, what kind of government do we have? And he said, a republic, if you can keep it. And the meaning of that, and you find this in all the founding fathers, is this mechanism is not sufficient on its own. The American experiment is an experiment in self-governance. Can we govern ourselves without a king? And the Europeans said, no, you can't. Good luck. And they said, you'll be back. No, that's a Hamilton reference. But the founding fathers, they thought, well, actually, we have some virtues as Americans who settled this land and created institutions. And Ben Franklin, he's the prototypical American. Oh, there's a problem? Let's come together, form a civic organization, collective action. We'll build a bridge, we'll build a fire company, we'll build a library. So when de Tocqueville traveled in America in the 1830s, that was his big observation about us, was that when there's a problem in Britain and France, people wait around for the king or the nobles to do something about it. In America, someone says, hey, we got a problem. And so, yeah, I agree. Okay, let's meet tomorrow at the church or whatever, and we solve it ourselves. And so
yes, but de Tocqueville said it only works because there's a high level of trust.
Yeah, that's right. right? High level of trust, social capital. Our fates are bound up. And if you're a frontier town and there is no army, there is no police, you are mutually interdependent. So that really defined the American character, and that allowed us to be the pioneers of modern liberal democracy. And so that's what the Founding Fathers dreamed of, that the people would have these skills and virtues. And when Thomas Jefferson founded the University of Virginia, which I was privileged to teach at for 16 years, it was very much with an eye towards democratic citizens. Okay. Democratic citizens are those who learn to be self-governing. And how do you learn to be self-governing? Well, childhood play, on the playground. What should we do today? Some say we should play dodgeball. Some say we should, go explore in the woods. We want to play together, so what are we going to do? We have to work that out. And then someone breaks the rules. No, I didn't. Yes, you did. And then everybody has to adjudicate. And so the skills of democracy are those that flourish when kids are given independence and can have conflicts. That's crucial. We put a stop to that beginning in the 90s. What if someone's feelings are hurt? What if someone's excluded? So we've been systematically depriving younger Americans of the skills of democracy, and that's without regard to the technology. Now let's bring in the technology. What does the technology do? Social media, of course, takes over our attention and channels information to us. We lose all the benefits we developed over time in a free press that had editors and quality control. That took a long time to get. We didn't have that really in the 18th and 19th century. We had it in the late 20th century. So a lot of the basic things that our democracy depends on, as Noah Yuval Harari says, democracy is a conversation. When that conversation took place in the Agora in Athens, that was the birth of one kind of democracy, direct democracy. It literally, you come together in a place, you talk. That was their democracy. We had a gigantic democracy, and the Founding Fathers talk a lot about this in the Federalist Papers. How can we do this if we're so big? And they thought, actually, there's an advantage, which is if there's some conflict or some issue erupts in Georgia, it's going to take weeks before people hear about it in Boston. So there's time. Things will slow down. Our size is an advantage. Okay, all of that goes away in the information age, and then with social media channeling stuff. So a lot of the things that make for a great liberal democracy are going away, or at least they've turned from bedrock into sand. Now, there are, of course, this happens with every technological transition. There's some amazing things about the internet, and even, let's say, Substack and podcasts are amazing. I mean, there is so much rich intellectual life out there because of the technology. But overall, it is dumbing us down, shrinking our attention span, hyper-empowering the extremes, the far left, the far right, trolls, Russian agents, North Korean agents, anyone who wants to mess with us. They don't even have to fly here. They just sit in a room, and they can make us hate each other. So we're in big trouble. And to bring this back to, so how do we adapt to this world? One possibility is that the large project, the large nation, all of that is going to be hard to recreate. We're going to have to create smaller communities, smaller groups in which we have trust, social relationships, and derive a sense of meaning. And so one thing I want to ask you, as I've been thinking about this work on the big picture about democracy, a lot of Jewish groups have been reaching out to me, starting in 2012 when I moved here and wrote The Righteous Mind, because Jews love to hate each other, and there's all kinds of divisions, and between Reform versus Orthodox, and left wing, right wing, and so there's been a lot of conflict within the Jewish community, and I knew nothing.
None of that here.
Yeah. and that's actually something, Angela and I have had a lot of conversation about a lot of things, but a lot of it has been about your challenge in holding together a community, which some people are on the right, some people are on the left, and then which is not unrelated to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, but it's a little different, and so you've got to navigate those gigantic divisions. And so I'd actually like to ask you, how do you do it? And then tell me about what role you see for both the technological effects on the community and also the generational. What are you seeing about Gen Z coming in?
So I get asked this question a lot, especially when I was kind of traveling around on the book tour, and people said, how do you hold an ideologically diverse community together? Which I want to just say, first of all, I think of as a sacred responsibility, and I think it's deeply important, not just for our Jewish community, but I actually think it's deeply important for democracy. Talk about having a smaller community that can represent what we want our larger community to be able to hold. And I've often given an answer, which I will give you kind of my short answer, and then I want to quote you, because when I read it, I was like, oh, that's what I'm doing. But I often think to myself that part of what we need to do is both be able to, as a community, in some ways, pray together, sing together, and transcend the things that feel different and remind ourselves of something that we share, a shared narrative that we have, and then also serve something bigger than ourselves together. So like when we are serving, whether we're helping people who are coming in from being formerly incarcerated, helping them get on a path of teshuvah, or we are feeding people who are hungry in our community, when you've done that with someone, not only are you transcending in some way, but let's say you might vote differently. And, it's really hard to demonize. You might still disagree with their viewpoint, but you can't demonize someone that you've just sort of like served someone who's homeless a meal together. You just understand the kind of fundamental decency of another person, and then you can't just kind of paint them in that box of those people, which I think is happening so much when we talk about the language of like the deplorables on the other side or whatever it is. So, but you had this quote, which I thought was a beautiful way of putting this from a social scientist perspective. You said, strong communities don't just magically appear whenever people congregate and communicate. The strongest and most satisfying communities come into being when something lifts people out of the lower level so that they have powerful collective experiences. They all enter the realm of the sacred together at the same time. When they return to the profane level, where they need to be most of the time to address the necessities of life, they have greater trust and affection for each other as a result of their time together in the sacred realm. So I just think about the fact that we have been having Friday night services, for example, that have been filled to the balconies for the last 2.5 years. Filled to the balconies. What are people coming for? I think they are coming because they enjoy it and they want to have Shabbat, but they are feeling a sense of collective effervescence, as you've put it, a sense that we are shared attention on something higher and bigger than ourselves, and connecting to sort of the moral beauty of like people's goodness, selflessness, courage. We're lifting up those kinds of stories. We're teaching Torah, reminding ourselves we're part of an epic story, not just this moment in time. Religion, I think these are all the kinds of technologies that we've had for a long time that help us. Jewish time is long. It reminds us that we're not just in this little moment. We have a much longer view of it. Shabbat is actually asking us to do exactly the antidote to what is happening, with technology, the spiritual degradation. That we have a lot of tools. Jewishness is not something you do by yourself. It's constantly pushing us back into community. You can't even do some of our prayers if you don't have a minyan, not just the Kaddish, but others as well. So it really is saying we need to be in this together. So there are so many ways that this ancient wisdom tradition is exactly the antidote we have to what is ailing us. But I would say in terms of generationally, I think that there is a difference in terms of I think both people's connection to technology from different generations, but also I think where you might end up living in the net and like where the kind of information you're getting. So I think part of it is that we want to create a new shared language that we have again across generations, and I think that would be helpful. Are there things you see that you, like what do you think are some of the spiritual tools to combat some of this?
Yeah. So let me start by sharing the key insight that changed my thinking about religion fundamentally. I was raised Jewish, had bar mitzvah, but called myself an atheist by the time I was 14 in my debates with my best friend whose dad was a minister. So I was really pretty distant from religion, certainly, and I was the sort of person who could have become a new atheist, with that period where all these science writers were like, religion is a virus, we got to get rid of religion. But in studying morality, I read some of the work of Émile Durkheim, the great French sociologist, who has a book on religion, and reading, and his book Suicide actually is what first really hooked me. What Durkheim understood was that the central miracle of human life is that there is social life at all. Every other animal, they cooperate because they're siblings. It's only humans, we can work in gigantic groups that are not related. And what Durkheim pointed out was that by studying the world's religions, that there's always a distinction between the sacred and the profane. And profane doesn't mean curse words, it means just ordinary life in the street, life in normal time. But
In Hebrew we say kodesh v'chol, and actually our time is either sacred time or profane time.
Beautiful.
Kodesh or chol, yeah.
Right. So what Durkheim pointed out is that every human community has things that call people together to do something that looks foolish, irrational, and wasteful to the new atheists. Why would you spend all this time, and why would you keep bowing, and why would you spend all this time memorizing these things? And it doesn't make any sense. But what Durkheim pointed out is it's doing this amazing thing. It's doing e pluribus unum. It's creating a congregation out of separate individuals. And it was when I came to understand that we get out of our regular time into a zone it's marked off in place, and there are spots that are holy, and it's marked off in time. And especially for Jews, I read, Herschel on the Sabbath, that it's a temple in time.
Sanctuary in time.
A sanctuary in time, yes. So when you look at it from a Durkheimian perspective, you can see how long it took us to develop communities within, technological modern society, and then you can see that all fading out. And that's what Robert Putnam showed us in the book Bowling Alone. We've been losing communities' trust, the Kiwanis Club, the whatever, bowling leagues. We're losing all of that since the 70s, down and down and down, and that included religious participation. And so then once you get through the great rewiring, everyone's on their device all the time, most people feel some sense of overwhelming meaninglessness. Now people are hungry for community. And so I'm hearing increasing signs of just what you said. A student I was talking to yesterday at NYU, she said, the church on 6th Avenue, right by NYU, is now flooded. It's Catholic church, Sunday services, you can't get in practically, and it's mostly young people. Wow. So we are seeing a hunger. We are seeing young Gen Z really becoming more religious, and it's great to see religious communities evolving and adapting for that.
I want to turn to a slightly different, a very different topic for a moment, which is just around anti-Semitism. And you have talked about this in part. Well, I'll let you describe. But anyway, communities, I think in particular, right now, we are feeling more vulnerable than we've ever felt. And that is not just, I think that's all around America, but even in New York, which has been sort of the most Jewish, home for us. Let's begin with just, I think, what has changed, which it used to feel that anti-Semitism was coming from the right, which feels like a kind of a crime against us coming from the outside. We had a speaker here about a month ago named Einat Wilf, and when I was talking to her, she said, the difference is when it was coming from the right, she said that kind of anti-Semitism felt like crime, and she said, but anti-Semitism from the left, which was coming in spaces like publishing and arts and cultural institutions and academia and media, she said that kind of anti-Semitism from the left feels almost like domestic violence, like it's coming from inside the house. And it's coming from in the places where Jews have lived the most. Not as many Jews, they're not living in white supremacist communities, right? So they're living, but these are the places that Jews have been the most at home, have contributed to them, in some cases even helped create the industry or whatever it is. Suddenly it feels like we are not safe there. So if you could tell us, what do you see as some of the causes of this rise in anti-Semitism from where you stand, and how this new technological environment has intensified, I think, what we're seeing?
So the Tree of Life shooting in Pittsburgh, was that 2019?
I think that's right.
I think it was 2019.
Right.
And the reason I remember it that way is because I was right over there in that corner when I learned about it. It was coming out, because it was my son Max, his bar mitzvah was a week later. And so my family, we came here, I think, to see the bar mitzvah the week before. And so we're coming out of services on the Saturday morning, and I turn on my phone, and so I was right over there when I learned about that. And that was a shock to Jews and to the country. But that was familiar. that's like what we think of as anti-Semitism. Far-right people with Nazi sympathies who are concerned about racial purity, and that guy was motivated by the fact that Jews were supporting immigration and bringing non-whites in. So that was a shock, but it was familiar. And and a couple years later, one of my students was telling me about her concerns about rising anti-Semitism. I said, you know what? Don't worry about it. Yes, you're seeing more because of the internet. Like the extremists, so you're seeing them more, but America is a philo-Semitic country. I can prove it to you. Pew surveys. What do you think about different groups? Who gets the highest rating? And it's Jews. Now, it's only by 1 point over Catholics, but
But it wasn't bad.
It was, yeah, it was, so look, overall, America's not an anti-Semitic country. Overall, Americans have a generally very positive view of Jews. But I said to her, don't worry about it. It's just an illusion from social media. And now I realize I was wrong. And part of it was, also, again, sitting here, you interviewed Barry Weiss after her book on anti-Semitism came out. And my family were sitting right up there. And what I remember, it was just such a powerful thesis. It was that anti-Semitism is actually now coming from 4 directions. And it's so clear once you hear it. So, of course, there's the far right, and that's still here today. And they're getting more of a hearing in Nick Fuentes and all that stuff. So the technology and cultural changes are making them louder. And there is occasional violence from them. The other source that we've had, certainly since the 60s and 70s, is from Muslims, Islamic groups. There's the conflict between Israel and Palestine. So there are periodically attacks on synagogues, killings of Jews around the world. Those have been here for decades. I don't get the sense that that's really changed that much. Of course, with the current war, yes, but I don't feel like the technology has really changed that. Although, of course, it helps ISIS recruiting. There's all kinds of, all terrorist groups are using the web, so that it does change that. So those are the 2 we're super familiar with. And then there are the 2 that are more uncomfortable to talk about, especially in a generally politically progressive community, because the third one that Barry points out is the frictions between black communities and Jewish communities, as has been erupting when you have especially Hasidic Jewish communities in Brooklyn, rubbing up against black neighborhoods, and there are often conflicts, and that sometimes leads to violence against visibly Jewish people, especially Jewish men. And so that's uncomfortable to talk about. That is certainly still there. But those 3 have been there for a long time. I could talk about that in the 1970s when you and I were kids. The new one, and the reason why we're having all these conversations today, is that the new one is anti-Semitism from the left. And that, there were traces of it perhaps, but I never, I've been in the universities continuously since 1981. I never picked that up. And as you said with the domestic violence quote, we felt totally safe and accepted in New York City, in universities, in publishing, in science, in arts. My mother told me when I was a kid. I remember my mother saying, Israel isn't actually the promised land for the Jews. It's actually America. Mm-hmm. That was just part of my patriotism, was bound up with being Jewish in America. So it's really it's the left-wing anti-Semitism which is new, and that's what I can just shed a little bit of light on here, which is social justice changed in the 2010s. There's what we older people think of as social justice, which has something to do with knocking down walls, creating equal opportunity, fighting for those who are oppressed, all that. And so there's this kind of social justice in the coddling the American mind. Greg and I call it common humanity identity politics. That's what Martin Luther King did. That's what Nelson Mandela did. You draw a circle around the whole community. You say, we are all Americans, or we are all humans, or we are all South Africans. And you do things together. And so that social justice, that's wonderful. And that works. It's worked over and over again in the 20th century. But something changed in the early 2010s, a set of new ideas. They're actually not new, but they really came to prominence, which is a set of goggles in which you see everything in binary categories, and it's one binary, oppressor versus oppressed. Everything must be fit into that binary. And if you do that, and because it often involves race, which is the biggest thing we've been trying to overcome. And so we older people, we think social justice, we think I have a dream that someday my children will be judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. Well, that now is called racist because you're being blind to the realities of eternal oppression. Anyway, so the point is, a set of new ideas came out, became very popular. Some of them emerged on Tumblr around 2013 about identity. It gets picked up in some of the Black Lives Matter movement. It draws on some Marxist strains about class and oppression. But it's especially Michel Foucault, who I can't explain to you because I was never able to understand him in graduate school. But Foucault said everything is power. That's all that matters. Always look, everything is power. And that's a really sick thing to do to young people in college. Welcome to college. Now, look around everybody, you see their race, you know whether they're good or bad. You know whether they're an oppressor or a victim. Like, that's insane that we did that. And that has brought ruin to the left. Who is getting most depressed? We've broken it out. We have a lot of data. We have a lot of graphs. The depression anxiety epidemic especially hit left-wing girls. They're the ones, everybody's worse off. They plunged because they embraced these ideas the most. These ideas have brought ruin to the Democratic Party. They have alienated so many people who were repulsed by Donald Trump. They pushed Mexican Americans, they pushed Hispanic Americans, they pushed African American men. The hatred of this oppressor-victim mindset, which is so un-American, has brought, I believe, ruin to the left. I think we're coming out of it now. The sort of the Great Awakening is kind of winding down. But the point is, Jews are coded as white and rich, so we're oppressors. And Israelis are coded as white and powerful. And boy, are they powerful. I didn't know until late into adulthood that most Israelis are not Ashkenazi. They're mostly Sephardic. They're mostly would be coded as non-white. Although, with the Palestinians, compared to that, they are all white. And so a lot of young people have been drawn into a set of ideas that are the most fertile possible ground for anti-Semitism. And it wasn't like this when we were in college in the 80s and 90s. It wasn't like this. But a lot of college students, and that brings me to, why is it worse in the Ivy Leagues? That was a real shock. That it was at the Ivy League schools where we started seeing, some, actual physical violence and physical intimidation. It wasn't like, the South, that's where people are racist. No, it was at the most elite schools. And this actually calls to mind, as I was talking about our session today, I was telling my wife Jane, and she said, be sure to remind Rabbi Buchdahl of how grateful we are to her that you run a thing for graduating seniors about how to preserve your Jewish identity when you're off in college.
Yeah. Max came.
And Max came, that's right. And so Max came, I think it was 2 meetings or 2 weeks. And when he went off to college at USC 2 years ago, the first thing he did, he went to the Chabad, and the friends he made there became his closest friends, and that has been an anchor. He's doing a lot of other things. He's doing ROTC. He's in a fraternity. So those are all good. But it really was amazing the way the Chabad community was just great for these freshmen coming in, with reduced social skills because they're Gen Z, with a reduced sense of meaning. I mean, that's what's
true.
Yeah.
That's true.
But the point is that at schools like USC on the west, but especially at schools in the South, at schools all over the country, they're not having pro-Hamas protests. So where is it happening? It's happening at the elite, rich Northeastern schools especially. And that's why so many Jews are looking to the South. And that's why I went on a trip with my daughter. We only went to Southern schools. We went to Miami, UNC, Duke. And those schools are all saturated with applications from Northeastern Jews who no longer want to send their kids to the Ivies. So it's at the Ivies where this oppressor-victim mindset most took hold. At state schools, most people don't care about it. It's really, rich, It's like rich, super progressive, places where there's a lot of rich, super progressives and almost no viewpoint diversity, where there's no conservatives on campus. That's where certain ideas become more and more extreme. And so this is my explanation for why this weird, historically anomalous left-wing anti-Semitism took root at elite universities and spread wherever those graduates go, into publishing, into academia, wherever they go, they bring this view with them. And it's a real problem for Jews, and especially for Reform Jews.
Okay, I want to just tell people that if you have questions and you want to put them on a card, that we will have people who will collect a few. I also got a few from before that were sent in. I also have like 10 more questions I want to ask you, and we have like 7 minutes. So, but we'll take a few if we have a few. It is this sense of polarization and kind of political ideology. I think that we know that in many ways political views have taken on almost like a religious meaning for people. It becomes, in place of in a secular world, it kind of takes on a religious significance. And so what do you think, why are they so sacred? And are we asking politics to do the work that used to be done by faith, and at what cost?
I think that's exactly right. So I'll go back to Durkheim on this. If we need community, we get community by shared sacredness. Religions, I believe, evolved over time. They evolved culturally to satisfy those needs and create communities that were functional. When religion goes out of people's lives, there's a hole. And so there's a wonderful quote. It's actually, you might have heard it, there's a God-shaped hole in every human heart. It's not literally a quote from Pascal, the French philosopher, but he says that in a paragraph. But let's go with that. There's a God-shaped hole in every human heart.
Say that as an atheist. I like
exactly.
that.
I'm a Jewish atheist, but I've come to believe that's true. Now, and so I found Christian communities, I get invited to speak at a lot of Christian communities because they see me as a scientist who's not hostile to religion. And I always say to them, we agree on something really important. We all agree. There is a God-shaped hole in every human heart. Now, I happen to believe that it got there by evolution. I described that in chapter 9 of The Righteous Mind. You believe it got there because we're made by a creator and we long for a creator. Okay, we differ on that. But man, do we agree that when there's nothing in there, it gets filled with garbage. And that always, I win them over with that line. Because it's true. And, consumer society has always had lots of garbage to pump at kids, especially girls. Everything is about your looks, buy this product. But once they get on TikTok and Instagram, it's 1,000 times stronger. Get ready with me videos, buy this stuff. You're 9 years old. Why are you doing this? So absolutely, we see that, and I can trace it out again. I told you that when you trace out the rise of depression, anxiety, self-harm, suicide, all that, you see a bigger rise in girls than boys. You see a bigger rise on the left than the right. So it's the liberal girls who are worst off. But you do the same with religion. Kids who agree with the statement, religion is important to me and my family, those kids had very little rise. Whereas those who say, no, it's not, they're the ones with the biggest rise. So it's just proof of not proof, but it certainly is consistent with this hypothesis that if you don't have a stable moral community, that's crucial, a community organized around moral precepts and authority, moral authority from the past. It's not up to you to make up everything at every moment. Then you have a sense that you belong to something, you belong to a moral order. And what Durkheim gave us is the word anomie, which means normlessness, no norms. When you try to raise kids in a state with no clear norms, they're going to have the feeling that life is meaningless. Why try? There's nothing to hope for. And so I think that whoever that question is, that here? Are you here? Whoever that questioner is, raise your hand. Okay, whoever that person is, or maybe it came from online.
Yeah.
But I think that's exactly right.
I love this. This talk, The Case for Religion, sponsored by Central Synagogue, with Jonathan Haidt. You couldn't be a better proponent for why I truly also believe it is so deeply important for religious communities to flourish. Here's one from online as well. Despite rising polarization, do you see any cultural or institutional trends that give you hope that democratic societies can recover healthier forms of disagreement?
Yes, okay, yes. The general trends are bad, and the technology makes them worse, and AI is going to make them even worse. So from a techno-determinist view, I would say, nope, we're going down, it's hopeless. Okay, but hold on, I'm not going to say that. Because we do have some agency, and I see a lot more of it now than I did 2 years ago. 2 or 3 years ago, our universities were still stuck in this, woke is the word, environment in which we couldn't really talk openly about things. And that meant that we desperately need good social science in the 21st century. All these existential problems, they're not physical problems, they're social problems. And we need good social science. And I was despairing, like, it just gets worse and worse, it never gets better from 2015 on. But it really is getting better now. And so one sign of hope is that at universities, there is now a huge uptake in programs on civil discourse and dialogue. So I co-founded with Caroline Mell, I co-founded an organization called the Constructive Dialogue Institute. We have a program called Perspectives, and it teaches young people why we're divided, why liberals and conservatives disagree, how to start a conversation so that you don't get, you start by asking them, understanding them, so we can actually teach people to thrive with viewpoint diversity instead of fearing it. And I have hope because actually since October 7th, CDI, we've had huge uptake at universities. Before then it was a hard sell, but now they really want it, they're using it, it's getting great results. So I'm seeing a revival on campus, we're seeing a revival of religion as we just talked about. I think we're seeing increasingly people who understand the threat to American democracy. So will this movement of sort of non-extremists, like center-left, center-right, libertarian, centrist, like, will we come together and come up with, party of sanity or something? I don't know. But I am seeing signs of a human rejection and concern about this dive into polarization.
You have been really behind making sure that viewpoint diversity is seen as a virtue, because there are ways that the culture has been kind of telling us, no, you don't even want to talk to those people. We're going to be anti-normalizing even this kind of other kind of dialogue. And I think that it has made an impact. I know that several Ivy League schools have actually started these discourse kinds of curriculums. Stanford has done it. I know Yale has done it. I think Harvard added a question on their application of can you tell us of a time when you actually disagreed with someone? That was never the kind of thing that they would value. Now that that's a question on their application because they want to actually seek out students who can actually seek that out. I think that's deeply important, and I think you've been part of changing and shifting that conversation as a value. It is something I've really valued here at Central, and we've talked about it. I remember, I will share quickly that I had a conversation with one of my congregants who was disappointed. This was at the first Trump election, and the inauguration had happened that week, and she came to services, and afterwards she said, I can't stay at Central. She said, these are not my people. And I said, well, first of all, we're not all one type, definitely not. But what do you mean? And she talked about the fact that she wanted us to go to the Women's March, and we didn't send buses to the Women's March, that we didn't come out strong in a way of saying this is a condemnable choice. I think that there was just some of that. And so I said, there are definitely many, many places you can go, including many synagogues, where you can get everyone who will agree with you more politically. I said, but we need you here, and and actually, I think that the problem with our Jewish communities and larger with America is that we all flee any place in which there are people who are thinking differently than us. And we actually need to be in that community and stay in it and continue to work to understand and get curious about where people are from other places. And so this is actually, as I said, a sacred responsibility of spiritual communities, and we are one of the few places where this still exists, where there is that kind of diversity, and I think it's deeply, deeply important. She did stay, and in fact, she started and led a group that met across political difference for a year. That was back in 2016. That felt a lot easier time than even today. So I'm going to give you, oh my gosh, we're ready. I'll give you one last question. I'm sorry, go ahead, Jonathan.
Okay.
What were you going to say?
I just want to briefly say that the pursuit and value of viewpoint diversity is, I've learned only in late adulthood, is a distinctly Jewish trait, and one
Very
that's
Jewish.
Adapted. And so I started Heterodox Academy, an organization to promote viewpoint diversity in the academy, and we did a version of John Stuart Mill, who's great on this. He who knows only his own side of the case knows a little of that. And it wasn't until I had a conversation with Rabbi Jonathan Sachs in 2014 that he said, actually, here's 5 quotes from the Jewish tradition about that. Right. And then you have been amazing at this. She is so amazing on this that it was one of your, I think, Yom Kippur sermons I watched it and I said, Angela, can we just post this as a blog post at Heterodox Academy? Because it was all about, what was it, 2 Jews, 3 opinions, and
Yes.
how Havruta, the study partners, how we study Torah, it's driven by seeking out people to critique the errors in your own case. So anyway, the point is, I think Jews are really pre-adapted for this era of polarization to be a healing force.
That's right. Let us be a healing force. Okay, finally, this last question that came from the crowd today. How can we help our own children reconcile the truth about Jewish history without getting stuck ourselves in the victim-oppressor mentality?
Wow.
And maybe I
How
might
do you do
add
it?
also
Yeah.
with this, just like how do we understand the dangers without catastrophizing, which I know is something you've also written about.
Yeah. I mean, it's very hard if someone has a deep set of moral convictions backed up by social relationships and your identity is as a fighter for justice in that way. It's very hard to talk someone out of it. It's very hard to... So I would start by reading Dale Carnegie and taking the constructive dialogue course, and the universal advice is to start by listening a lot. You have to ask questions. You have to understand how they see it and what's motivating them. And then you have to acknowledge the things they're right about, because they're always right about some things. And if you do that, it often, not always, but it often has this magical power of reciprocity, where if you've listened and listened and listened, and acknowledged and acknowledged and acknowledged, and then you bring up one point, just one point, where, and here's why I'm concerned about this. There's a lot of pressure on them now, or even desire, to reciprocate. And so that's at least the beginning. If you can start with mutual acknowledgement, now you're on the road to better conversation. Just take it slowly and take it over time. And there's a lot more that can be said about it. It's very hard. It can be done, and I would always also bring in social forces and not just you and your child. Your child is likely to listen to other people a lot more than you. So there's all kinds of other conversations that you could have.
Thank you. So we're going to end with just one song, but before we do, I just want to say that truly, Jonathan, you are a hero of our people. You have brought and named and brought to attention things that have really truly been enslaving us. As we're entering into a holiday of Passover, Mitzrayim, our narrow places, it's not just a physical place, and it's not just about being enslaved to things that come from outside. We can enslave ourselves to our technologies, to our ideas, to our sort of small thinking sometimes, and we have in a certain way enslaved our kids, and we need to help them come out of that as well. And so this is a time when we have to think about, what does freedom really look like? What does human flourishing look like? You have been a champion. You've been telling us what's wrong, but you've also given us many of the ways that we think about how we actually flourish. And I would argue that I think religious life has given us that for 3,000 years. Judaism has given us that, so that we have some of these technologies at our disposal. We're about to, like, in 2 weeks, sit with our families and break bread together, pray together, sing together, talk about our values together. That's all like a recipe for actually meaning, and also remind ourselves that we're part of a much bigger story and something much bigger than ourselves. All of this is like the most important thing that we could be doing as an antidote for this. So I think we will conclude with that, but I just want to say thank you for being one of our heroes and champions in this world.
Thank you, Angela.
I guess I'll do this here. All right, so please join. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. You guys know this, sing with me. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Just say, they'll be singing. They'll be singing. They'll be singing. They'll be singing over me. And before I'll be a slave, Cheers to our freedom. Happy Passover. Thank you to the incredible Jonathan Haidt.